Despite the centrality of slavery to its empire, 18th century Great Britain prided itself on being the world's most advanced and freest nation. It was not only the era's greatest naval and commercial power, but also the home of a complex governmental system with a powerful parliament representing the interests of a self-confident landed aristocracy and merchant class. In London, the largest city in Europe with a population approaching 1 million by the end of the 18th century, Britain possessed a single political, cultural, economic capital. It enjoyed a common law, common language, and with the exception of a small number of Jews, Catholics, and Africans, common devotion to Protestantism. For much of the 18th century, Britain found itself at war with France, which had replaced Spain as its major continental rival. This situation led to the development of a large military establishment, high taxes, and the creation of the Bank of England to help finance European and imperial conflicts. For both Britons and colonists, war helped to sharpen a sense of national identity against foreign foes. British patriotic sentiment became more and more assertive as the 18th century progressed. Symbols of British identity proliferated: the songs God Save the King and Rule, Britannia, and even the modern rules of cricket, the national sport. The rapidly expanding British economy formed another point of pride, uniting Britons and colonists. Continental peoples, according to a popular saying, wore wooden shoes. That is, their standard of living was far below that of Britons. Especially in contrast to France, Britain saw itself as a realm of widespread prosperity, individual liberty, the rule of law, and the Protestant faith. Wealth, religion, and freedom went together. Central to this sense of British identity was the concept of liberty. The fierce political struggles of the English Civil War and the Glorious Revolution bequeathed to 18th century Britons an abiding conviction that liberty was their unique possession. They believed power and liberty to be natural antagonists. To mediate between them, advocates of British freedom celebrated the rule of law, the right to live under legislation to which one's representatives had consented, restraints on the arbitrary exercise of political authority, and rights like trial by jury enshrined in the common law. On both sides of the Atlantic, every political cause, it seemed, wrapped itself in the language of liberty and claimed to be defending the rights of Englishmen. European writers dissatisfied with the lack of liberty in their own countries looked to Britain as a model. The House of Commons, House of Lords, and King each checked the power of the others. This structure, wrote the French political philosopher Baron Montesquieu, made Britain the one nation in the world whose constitution has political liberty for its purpose. Until the 1770s, most colonists believed themselves to be part of the freest political system mankind had ever known. As the coexistence of slavery and liberty within the empire demonstrated, British freedom was anything but universal. It was closely identified with the Protestant religion and was invoked to contrast Britons with the servile subjects of Catholic countries. It viewed nearly every other nation on earth as enslaved to popery, tyranny, or barbarism. One German military officer commented in 1743 on the British contempt of foreigners. They pride themselves not only upon their being free themselves, but being the bulwarks of liberty all over Europe, and they vilify most of the nations on the continent for being slaves, as they call us. British liberty was fully compatible with wide gradations in personal rights. Yet in the minds of the free residents of Great Britain and its North American colonies, liberty was the bond of empire. These ideas sank deep roots not only within the political nation, those who voted, held office, and engaged in structured political debate, but also far more broadly in British and colonial society. Laborers, sailors, and artisans spoke the language of British freedom as insistently as pamphleteers and parliamentarians. Although most white men in Britain and many in the colonies lacked the right to vote, they influenced public life in other ways, serving on juries and taking to the streets to protest what they considered oppressive authority. Ordinary persons challenged efforts by merchants to raise the cost of bread above the traditional just price, and the Royal Navy's practice of impressment, kidnapping poor men on the streets for maritime service. Liberty was central to two sets of political ideas that flourished in the Anglo-American world. One is termed by scholars republicanism, although few in 18th century England used the word, which literally meant a government without a king, and conjured up memories of the beheading of Charles I. Republicanism celebrated active participation in public life by economically independent citizens as the essence of liberty. Republicans assumed that only property-owning citizens possessed virtue, defined in the 18th century not simply as a personal moral quality but as the willingness to subordinate self-interest to the pursuit of the public good. "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom," wrote Benjamin Franklin. In 18th century Britain, this body of thought about freedom was most closely associated with a group of critics of the established political order known as the Country Party, because much of their support arose from the landed gentry. In Britain, Country Party publicists like John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon, authors of Cato's Letters, published in the 1720s, had little impact. But their writings were eagerly devoured in the American colonies, whose elites were attracted to Trenchard and Gordon's emphasis on the political role of the independent landowner and their warnings against the constant tendency of political power to infringe upon liberty. The second set of 18th century political ideas celebrating freedom came to be known as liberalism, although its meaning was quite different from what the word suggests today. Whereas Republican liberty had a public and social quality, liberalism was essentially individual and private. The leading philosopher of liberty was John Locke, whose two treatises of government, written around 1680, had limited influence in his own lifetime but became extremely well known in the next century. Government, he wrote, was formed by a mutual agreement among equals, the parties being male heads of households, not all persons. In this social contract, men surrendered a part of their right to govern themselves in order to enjoy the benefits of the rule of law. They retained, however, their natural rights whose existence predated the establishment of political authority. Protecting the security of life, liberty, and property required shielding a realm of private life and personal concerns, including family relations, religious preferences, and economic activity, from interference by the state. During the 18th century, Lockean ideas, individual rights, the consent of the governed, the right of rebellion against unjust or oppressive government, would become familiar on both sides of the Atlantic. Like other Britons, Locke spoke of liberty as a universal right, yet seemed to exclude many persons from its full benefits. While Locke was one of the first theorists to defend the property rights of women and even their access to divorce, and condemned slavery as a vile and miserable estate of man, the free individual in liberal thought was essentially the propertied white man. Nonetheless, by proclaiming that all individuals possess natural rights that no government may violate, Lockean liberalism opened the door to the poor, women, and even slaves to challenge limitations on their own freedom. In the 18th century, these systems of thought overlapped and often reinforced each other. Both political outlooks could inspire a commitment to constitutional government and restraints on despotic power. Both emphasized the security of property as a foundation of freedom. Both traditions were transported to 18th century America. Ideas about liberty imported from Britain to the colonies would eventually help to divide the empire.